welcome to the ASA 2021 Student Early Career event. This is an event co-sponsored by ASA and InterVarsity's Emerging Scholars Network, and we're delighted that you could join us. I'll do a few announcements before we do some brief worship in words together, and then our keynote interview with Francis Sue and Alynne MacLean. First of all, we'd love to invite you to join Emerging Scholars Network. It's free, and you can join at this address on the screen, blog.emergingscholars.org. And we're a part of InterVarsity, the campus ministry, and we're a part of specifically the grad and faculty ministries section of InterVarsity. And we help connect faith and work for those who are considering grad school, for grad students and postdocs, for early career faculty, and for early career research professionals. So if you're in one of those categories, or if you advise people who are, we would love for you to sign up and get our monthly announcements and know about various digital and in-person events and our blog. So please do join us there. I also wanted to make sure everyone got a warm welcome to our evening events. First, there's the State of the ASA meeting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're really excited to have Steve Macchia, who is an InterVarsity Press author, among many other things, as the keynote speaker there. And it's also the launch of ASA's new inaugural Early Career Scientist Award and Campus Ministry Award for a campus minister engaging faith and science. So that's a brief but very important part of the meeting, and we'd love for you to be there to celebrate it with us. That will be followed by an ice cream social at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and I believe if you signed up in time to get an ASA package, that you have some sprinkles to put on the ice cream. So we look forward to seeing you then. Now let's transition to some brief worship in words. So last year at this event, we had worship in music, which was a wonderful experience. This year, we're lucky enough to have two wonderful keynote speakers instead of one. And so we want them to have enough time. And so we're going to participate in a long-standing Christian practice of worshiping together in words through a brief liturgy for early career scientists that we've crafted for this occasion. So I'd ask you, if you're willing and able, to keep your mic off so that we don't create an echo situation, but please do read aloud along with me. And as we read this prayer together, again with mics off so as not to create any echo challenges, look around your screen and think about all the different places in the world and time zones your fellow participants are in. And I hope that will be a picture of what it means to be the Church Universal across time and space for us as we pray together. So I will walk us through 5 slides with brief parts of the prayer on each one. And now we'll begin. O Lord, you created all things and brought them into being by the power of your word. You called the stars and the sun into existence. You crafted the water and the land. You designed each being, each plant and rock and animal. Lord, we are humbled by your great work in calling creation into being. We ask that you would speak too into our lives and vocations, and that you would call us to live more fully into how you have created us. Let us pay close attention to how you have created the natural world. Let us also pay close attention to how you have created us as people who are stirred with wonder at your work and are called to study it. Lord, sometimes when we look at our uncertainties about the future, our experience seems without form, waiting to be shaped. As your spirit hovered over the waters at the beginning of creation, be present in our lives, bringing our lives and vocation into the pattern you have crafted for us. Let us embrace the good works you have created us to do, remembering always that they are gifts from you and that your work of love precedes any work we do for you. For those seasons of our lives when work is difficult or even impossible due to illness or other interruptions, Let us remember that your endless love for us is in no way affected by our abilities or productivity. Let us still rejoice in your creation, marveling at your work and the gifts that you give, including the gift of Sabbath rest. In our scientific work and in our lives, let us be present to the moment you have given us, even as we long for the fullness of your new creation at the end of time. Grant that our work and our rest now may point forward to that full renewal of the cosmos, and that we may find joy each day in your creation. Amen. Thank you for joining us in Worship in Words together. And now we'll transition to Growing Your Early Career for the Common Good, our keynote interview with Alynne MacLean and Frances Sue. And we will begin our interview. So Alynne MacLean serves as the leader of Science with a Mission and develops amazing diagnostics to test health conditions in the developing world. And we're really delighted to have her here as a health innovator and someone who pursues the common good in her work. And Frances Sue is a mathematician and the recent president of the Mathematical Association of America and the author of a book on mathematics for human flourishing. And so we're delighted to welcome both of us. And Frances and Alynne, you both pursue your mathematical or scientific work in ways that are very thoughtful about the common good. Alynne, would you start off by telling us in a bit more detail about your work in health diagnostics? And could you weave in also how it connects to your faith?
Sure. All I do is diagnostics. We don't do medicine or anything else. But the diagnostics that we make were made specifically for places that are the poorest places in our world. That's who we were trying to help. And so we have diagnostics that don't need electricity, since many parts of the world don't have it or will lose it, say in the Philippines after a typhoon. They give results rapidly. So we don't want to tell people come back and get your results in a week. We need to tell people right away when they're able to see a health person. If they need help, we need to get it to them right then. Our stuff does not need refrigeration. So it has a long shelf life and will be available when people really need it. It's very lightweight. It can get to remote areas. So if you're talking cloud forest in Costa Rica or taking it on a boat traveling up the rivers in Guatemala to reach Mayan Indians, or taking it on a helicopter in Tanzania to reach places without roads, our diagnostics can go alongside and be a part of the medical ministry there. It's very affordable. Most of our tests cost $1 a piece. It's amenable to mass screening. So if you have a potential water source you think that's infected, you can actually screen large numbers of people very quickly and very affordably. And it's easy to use, so you don't have to be a medical professional to read the results. I don't know that this will work. We'll see how well my camera is on this. But you can, right here, you just see a single line. This was an HIV test. Each test in general will have the possibility of either one line, that's the control line, lets you know the test worked properly, you can trust the results. When there are two lines, that means the patient is positive for the disease you test for. And so this just came about as a combination of my love and passion for science and my desire to help God's people in the poorest parts of the world. So this is how I get to live out my faith doing this.
Thank you so much, Alynne. That's such an exciting and inspiring set of projects you're working on, and it's wonderful to hear more details about it. Frances, will now turn to you for a little bit of an introduction to your work. You're a mathematician, and you've written a book called Mathematics for Human Flourishing. Tell us a little bit about that idea and how you practice it in your work as a professor and a leader in the field. And if you can, we'd love for you also to weave in a little bit about how that idea of human flourishing connects to your faith for you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So I guess one of the reasons that I've been thinking about this question of what mathematics is and what it's for, and what does it mean to connect it to human flourishing, is that when I think a little bit about the things that draw me to mathematics. Part of the as a mathematician, and what draws many people to math who are in mathematical fields, and part of what you realize is that often those things are missing for some reason from the math classroom. Like, often we think of math as the purpose of learning math as to learn some skills, to get a good job, or to be credentialed, right? But that's a very utilitarian view of math, as just a means to an end. But what if the purpose of math were to help people flourish as human beings? Then the way we teach math, the way we learn it, the way the attitudes the public has about math would be very different, wouldn't they? Right? People think of math now as just a set of skills to master, like long division or factoring quadratic. But honestly, those skills are not the things that people actually need when they learn. When you learn math, you actually learn math to build virtues like clear thinking, or like creativity or persistence. Right? Those are the things you're going to take with you, no matter what career you go into. And so, the idea of thinking about and writing about mathematics for human flourishing is to ask people to think a little more broadly about what it means to do math and why we do math. And I suppose my own Christian faith comes into this, because when I became a Christian in college, and that was part of the question I began asking myself is what is the reason that I should be doing mathematics? I mean, maybe I should be doing something very practical, right? Why is there any reason at all to study something as abstract as what I'm studying? I study combinatorial topology, right? Like, is that going to do the world any good, right? In some sense, that was the question that I asked myself. And so over many years, I think I began thinking deeply, partly as a result of my faith, about the big questions, and asking how my work could serve the common good.
I really love that way of thinking about it, Francis. And I actually, when I was doing my master's degree at St. John's College, I was lucky enough to take a course on geometry where we worked through Euclid, through the original text. And that was kind of the thesis of that class, that mathematics helps us develop virtues and clarity of thought. And so that was a really wonderful experience. But I think you're so right that it's often not how mathematics is taught in the US. And so it's great to hear your perspective on that. So I think you've partially answered my next question for both of you, but I'll give you a chance to go a little further on it if you'd like to. I was curious how your sense of calling to your field areas developed, and if you remember any key moments along the way where you tried something out and realized, oh, this really needs to be part of my ongoing work. And you've given us a little of that story with wrestling with, can I do something that seems more abstract and less applied and still be working for the common good? But would you have anything to add to that, especially about like key moments that were turning points in those realizations for you?
I mean, I guess when I was in graduate school and I began to teach, there was a moment there where I realized I really enjoyed seeing the light bulb go on for my students when I taught, and so I got a sense of my calling to teach in graduate school. In terms of the research that I do, I sort of wandered around a bit, and I've always sort of just taken opportunities as they arose. I think in terms of public engagement, my calling to that, I think, happened gradually. Partly, I mean, it wasn't like I was looking for leadership, but as opportunities presented themselves, I asked God about how I could use these opportunities to serve the common good and to help people flourish, and that's part of how that happened.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of that story. Alynne, how about for you? How did you develop your sense of calling both to the scientific area you work on and to that sense of how you could work for the common good? And are there any key moments you'd point back to as like a moment when you thought, oh, I know this is the direction I should go?
I was in 5th grade when I told my family I was going to become a scientist. I just loved it, was passionate about it. And usually kids by that age, things will change as you get older. Apparently I didn't grow up because I just continued to love science. Went to Gordon College to get my bachelor's in chemistry. And it was in between my sophomore and junior years when I went on my first mission trip. And that's when I saw for the first time how people live in the developing world. Nowadays, people get more exposure between internet and TV, and you don't have to travel someplace to have seen or witnessed certain things. But when I was younger, I hadn't seen or known anything what it was like in the poorest parts of the world until I was there. And I had this overwhelming sense of, oh my heavens, I want to help these people. But I'd always planned on going on, even after Gordon, to get a PhD in chemistry. And I'm like, okay, God, how does me getting a PhD in chemistry help these people? So I remember very clearly praying. I knew that a lot of people go on mission trips and they have this wonderful high. They're on high for, yay, Jesus. You come back, back to the Monday and you forget. And so I just remember praying, dear God, don't let me forget. Don't let me forget what I'm feeling right now. Don't let me forget this passion that you're giving me to want to help these people. And that's all I prayed. And he has honored that through my life. When I went back to Gordon and was finishing my degree, I had to really kind of figure out what I'm doing now. My goal maybe shouldn't be to continue on for grad school. So okay, I'm a Christian and I want to help people in the developing world. Obviously, I'm supposed to become a missionary. So I prayed about that. And I definitely did not feel called to become a missionary. So I'm like, okay. The next prayer was, all right, God, this is all your fault. You are the one that gave me this joy and passion from science. And you're the one that gave me this heart for your people in the poorest parts of our world. I don't understand how these two things go together. But if you show me, I'll do it. And so I just continued to then start looking at grad schools. And as I looked at various programs around the country, learned about what was a brand new technology at the time at the University of Kentucky, enzyme immunoassays. Eventually, it gave us the home pregnancy test, and it's the technology I use for our diagnostics, but none of that had been invented yet at the time. But I saw the technology and I was like, this is it. I'm supposed to go get a PhD in this field. Then I'll join some big existing Christian nonprofit that will start using it to help people overseas, and got the degree. Nobody was using it to help people overseas because you can't make money off those people. So eventually what it became was, nobody else is doing it. Okay, God, I guess I have to try. And so quit my job and started that. But that was the process, taking it along, God, bringing both the passion for science and helping people together.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that powerful story, Alynne. I really love how it has this clear certainty about science that started pretty early in your life, and yet also all these sort of surprise twists and turns where you realize, oh, I'd like to do it this way. But that's not quite going to work, or I don't feel called to it. Maybe I'll do it that way. That thing doesn't even exist. And I think that's something that many people who work in scientific or science adjacent fields can relate to, that sense of, in a way, living out our creative callings by actually bringing things into being in imitation of God's creative ability and working on things that may not exist yet. And so I really love the way you've charted that for us. As our listeners think about these things, they're probably facing similar decision points or questioning points to the two of you, where they're thinking through, here's what I love to do. How does it help people? Does it need to help people directly? Are there other ways to approach it? What does it really mean to connect faith and work for the common good? And so I'd love to ask you both what advice you'd give on discovering how you can pursue your field in a way that does promote human flourishing. And Francis, I think we'll start with you for the moment.
Yeah, I think one good place to start is to pay attention to the problems of your discipline. Like, I'm not talking about the research problems as much as some of the potential problems with the culture of the discipline. I mean, for instance, in most academic fields, including mathematics, there's a high priority placed on achievement, and in many ways that can be toxic and detrimental, both for the individual but also for the discipline at large. And so there's an opportunity. How can you shape the culture of your discipline for good? There's a question to pay attention to. Another place, I think, also is to pay attention to the culture of the classroom. Math classrooms can be traumatic places for people, and sometimes people come out of traumatic experiences that they've had, and so then they enter your classroom. How can you provide a different experience than one that maybe typically a student encounters? I guess those are two places I'd start to think about how you might promote human flourishing in your field.
Well, those sound like really helpful starting points. Thank you so much. Alynne, what advice would you give on discovering how you can pursue your field in a way that does promote human flourishing, especially for early career folks?
Honestly, when I thought about that question, the only sentence that comes to mind is, don't chase the money. I think too many things get sidetracked, whether it's your own enjoyment and your own desire to help people and to do what you think God is calling you to do, because people will get sidetracked thinking they need and want to earn more money. And I think a lot of folks make some poor decisions, changing jobs or selecting jobs or locations or any number of things, because they think they need more money, and you don't. You really need a very small amount to live on, to be honest. And I think if you remove that from the equation, most people will very naturally find where their desire and God's desire for them intersect and be able to carry that out.
Thank you so much, Alynne. That's a very practical guideline and a helpful thought. Really appreciate the advice both of you have on this. I'm struck as I'm thinking through your wonderful advice. Practically, life as a student or someone starting a new job is often pretty busy. And thinking about these big questions like, how do I pursue the common good, often takes a lot of time. Obviously, you've both pursued full, rich, and busy careers also. And I'm curious, what have you found helpful in making space for those questions? And what do you recommend to early career science professionals in terms of trying to make space for the big questions in their career?
I guess one of the first places that has been a source of strength for me is having a community around you who can challenge you to think about some of these things and center you. And this could involve Christian community locally, maybe a group of faculty at your school or within the ASA or InterVarsity. For me, I think that's been one of the biggest influences. It's sort of helped keep me centered and thinking about some of these larger questions when the temptation is just to move from point A to point B without thinking about what you're doing. I think the other practice that I think has been very helpful to me is having regular times of reflection. And as busy as we all are, we certainly at least have Sundays, hopefully, where that some of that reflection can take place on a larger scale.
Those are very helpful, practical thoughts. Alynne, what are your thoughts on this one?
People might not want to hear what I have to say, and it may not be right for them. I mean, I personally had to sort of go all in. I had been working in industry and biotech for years, had in the back of my head, gee, I always thought I was supposed to get into this field to do this diagnostic stuff, and nobody's doing it, and maybe I could try and do something on my own on the side, but I had a really long commute. I worked insane hours, and nothing was happening. So I just had to finally, prayerfully decide, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to try and make this happen. one of my mom's favorite, descriptions of me was that I was cheap to keep. So I was able to live for a couple of years with no money and, get by, survive. And I figured I'd give it 2 years to see if I could get this thing off the ground. And if not, I figured God wasn't calling me to make it work. He was just calling me to try. I just felt he was asking me to try to do this, to see if we could, it's why he put me in this field of science, this particular field. And I was just supposed to try. And then I'd go back and get a regular job again. So I kind of had to go all in to check this out and to do this. So that's what worked for me, was trying to do it on the side here and there, hit or miss. I didn't have enough time to commit to it. And this was obviously something God wanted to see happen. So he's carried it on for 20 years now.
That's amazing. And I love how your two pieces of advice complement each other so well. Francis has pointed us to some helpful practices that you can weave into almost any sort of career or vocation that you're pursuing, and that may be God's calling for some of you. And Alynne has pointed us to the fact that sometimes God does call us to sort of radically reorient what we're doing. And it's a kind of a matter of discernment to know which one you're being called to at a particular moment. Do either of you have any further thoughts on how you know which of those two patterns to pursue at a given moment in life? Is it a road to Damascus experience? Is it a lot of people start giving you the same advice and you're thinking about it? What would be some pointers?
I mean, personally, I don't think God is calling us to a life of misery. So I just think you need to find that sweet spot between your passions and your skills and the world's needs. And I think you'll see it and you'll know it. And that, at least for me, that's how the two came together. And God then showed me how to live it out.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, I think that we have a certain luxury being in science, pursuing things that are of interest to us. And I guess I've always been of the mindset that if we have that opportunity, which is not afforded to everyone, we should pursue the directions that we feel God is calling us to, regardless of the risks, regardless of whether it brings us money or glory. And hopefully we're not chasing money or glory. And I think that's generally been I think the way that I've moved through my career as well. I've sort of looked at opportunities as they arose and went all in whenever I felt God was calling me in that direction.
I really appreciate the way that you both pointed us towards God giving us a desire towards certain kinds of work for their inherent value or for the ability to serve others through them. And my advisor used to tell me, happy people write more, which was very good advice, I discovered in the course of finishing my dissertation. And, obviously God's calling is a big thing to think through, but I do think that idea of God giving us certain kinds of desires to pursue is really encouraging and helpful. Obviously, there are moments where we have to sacrifice and moments where it's not totally clear which direction to take, and we need to rely on good advice and reading scripture and listening well. But I think that is a wonderful thing to hone in on, that sense of it. And I'll ask one more question before we transition to audience Q&A. I'm struck that working for the common good might take a very practical form, like diagnosing and treating illness, and that's wonderful. And it might also be something that seems a bit more abstract, as Francis was saying earlier, like teaching someone the delight of achieving a really elegant proof or something like that. And I'm curious, what are some of the categories of work for the common good that you think of along that spectrum, from very practical to very abstract? And how do you know where you land on that spectrum? in terms of your sense of vocation and calling?
I suppose in many ways, thinking about working for the common good is really about what it means to love our neighbor scientifically through the work that we do, science-wise, but also as human beings who do science. And so I like thinking about maybe the different ways that we can love people, and maybe those are sort of the categories that this falls into. I mean, when I teach somebody the delight of seeing a beautiful proof, or I coach them in their mathematical persistence, this is, I think, a way of loving the individual person, but also inviting them into a form of, if they're a believer, it's a form of worship to God, right? It's an acknowledgement that God has created something really wonderful and amazing, and I want everybody to experience some of that wonder. And when I'm thinking about something maybe more practical, like the actual research that I'm doing, I guess I think about that as not so much loving the individual, but as loving the world through the work that I do, and serving the world in that way.
Thank you so much, Francis. I love that way of putting it. Alynne, what are your thoughts on this question?
I mean, to me, when I hear the phrase doing things for the common good, it's so broad. I mean, I can picture somebody who, it's not related to science, but like their calling might be to raise their children well, or there's just so many ways that we can do things to help improve the kingdom we have right now here on earth, and to point people towards the future kingdom. I don't know, it's so not limited. I mean, it's just wide. And so that's, to me, there's so many different ways that people can feed into being a part of that, and asking the question of themselves, how has God built them to be a part of what he's trying to do in building his kingdom? It's not a narrow question. It's, God's creative. He can do all sorts of things with you. He's given you these incredible gifts, very varied. And even if you're a scientist and working in science, there's other gifts that maybe God wants to use as well, maybe even more so at a certain time in your life. So it's just, don't limit yourself in trying to think of how God wants to use you. Continue to seek his will, and he'll keep pointing you in different directions maybe, and you'll get used, no problem.
I love that way of putting it too. And I love that big vision of what God is doing, and how, even though it's often a process of figuring it out for us, God knows the directions he's calling us to, and will guide us into that. Thank you both so much. I would love to take some Q&A from the audience at this point. We have a question coming in from Caitlin Bowman-Cornelius. She says, thank you both so much. Building on Francis' point about looking for opportunities to change the culture of your community/classroom for good, it can be especially challenging for an early career scientist to effect that kind of change. Any further advice on that? As a postdoc, I feel like I can't always change the lab culture as much as I'd like to if I were the principal investigator. But I've been encouraged by Romans 12:18, living at peace and doing what I can as far as it depends on you. So any thoughts about that question of culture change in your early career, Francis?
I agree that actually, as an early career person, it's hard to enact things on a big scale. But I do resonate with your idea of doing what you can as far as it depends on you. And part of the practices that you're building as an early career scientist are the habits and dispositions that will carry you throughout your career. And so even if you're just working very locally with the people around you, later on you'll probably have bigger opportunities to enact change. And having practiced those habits early in your career, I think will serve you well as you move forward.
Thank you so much, Francis. Troy F. Staten asks, curious if each of you experienced any shifts over time in career emphasis/focus and how you navigated it, if so. Alternately, do any bivocational work-life balance additional thoughts? So, yeah, let's start with you on this first, Alynne. Have you experienced any shifts in career emphasis and focus, and how did you navigate that?
Well, all along, when I had first learned about this new technology at the University of Kentucky, I felt so certain God was telling me, go there, get your PhD, and then join, whether it was going to be, World Vision, World Relief, MAP International, some large Christian nonprofit that was going to take this brand new technology and roll it out to help people. And I was really flummoxed when nobody was doing that. Like, come on, God, I have heard from you since 5th grade. Like, I've done everything I thought I was supposed to. I'm here now. I've got my PhD. I'm looking around. How do I now, eat? What do I do next? So it can be when you think you've heard clearly from God and you go a certain way, man, flexibility can be the name of the game. So I said, all right, I love this technology. There's places I can work with it. So I worked in pharmaceuticals for 2 years and then biotechnology for 6, and just took vacation time to do mission trips and do things. And it was so staying flexible. I never, ever wanted to start something from scratch. Like, how does that work? Like that. Oh, my heaven. Who am I? I don't have a big place. Where's my lab? Where am I going to work? How will I eat? I have no husband who's going to be paying my mortgage. All these questions. But God answered them all. He had already planned it. My brother was a lawyer. He did all the incorporation. My sister has a PhD, but she's a college professor. I did my lab work there. Piecemeal by piecemeal, as I continued on, it was wonderful to just be able to say, this is God's ministry. He's the one that's bringing in the people donating the money. He's bringing in all the science. It just continued. It was never about me. And but it can be hard when you think you're going one direction and you kind of have to change pace a little bit or do something different. But yeah, being willing to be flexible is a great thing. So.
Thank you so much, Alynne. Francis, any thoughts on career shifts over time or emphasis shifts in a career over time and how to navigate those?
Yeah, I've actually changed directions several times in my career, starting in graduate school when I changed advisors twice for various reasons that I don't need to go into now, but those were some difficult things to navigate. And then after getting my moving to Harvey Mudd, I changed fields again, basically because, well, I don't need to get into that now either. But I think one of the things that's hard about that, of course, is that you don't necessarily have the support that you might have from an advisor or other thing when you're moving into another field. And I guess part of the question was about how you navigated it. And I think the reason that I did it was because I realized I wouldn't be happy in the situation, that I was currently in, that I didn't feel that I was I wanted to stay in this area. And so why continue to publish and try to do work in an area that you're just not committed to, right? You'll write more if you're happier. That's maybe the way that version of the way that I thought about that. And so I, in each of these situations, prayed about the change and also asked myself some hard questions about, what kind of career what kind of research area or what kind of emphasis I wanted to have, and what were my strengths. Like I realized I have a lot more enjoyment of doing mathematics when I'm doing it with other people. And so collaboration became a huge part of what I do. I collaborate with students in guiding them in doing research or collaborating with peers. And so that's, I think, served me well to think a little bit about that. I don't try to overplan. I didn't try to overplan my career, but I did think a little bit about what my strengths were, what my weaknesses were, and how and what fields would suit me well to move into.
Thank you both so much. Really helpful glimpse into your experience. And AJ Boulay says in the chat, thank you for sharing your experience in changing supervisors and areas. This is encouraging for me in my academic career today. Thanks for sharing that, AJ. Dwight Schwartz says, I am hearing allusions to something that I would call teamwork. And I guess we could add collaboration. This came through before. Francis wonderfully brought up collaboration. Any thoughts on the need to be part of a group that is seeking human flourishing, etc.? And Francis says, you just addressed collaboration. We'll start with you on this one and then move to Alynne.
There's a lot of things that are coming through my mind, but I'll just say one thing that's coming through my mind: alignment. So I think it's really important to be with a group or a PhD advisor or a postdoctoral advisor with whom you share some alignment in your values. In one instance in my graduate school experience, I was with an advisor who was just a jerk. And I realized I didn't want to work for a jerk as much as I wanted to work in that area. And so I don't know that they need to be completely aligned. They don't necessarily have to share the same values down to the T. But I think it's important if you want to have an ethical career to work for somebody who's got a basic sense of ethics, right? I mean, that's an example. So I think alignment's important.
That's great. Thanks so much. Alynne, any thoughts on teamwork and collaboration and being a part of a group seeking human flourishing?
It makes sense because I think that's part of how God made us and why he has so much work done through his church. We're not meant to be lone rangers. Even to this day, I mean, it's very misleading. You can read the title of I'm President of Science with a Mission. I'm the president of nobody. There are no employees other than me. So don't be impressed by the title. But I've always had a board of directors. I've always had people that have bounced ideas off of. I've always had people that have prayed with me. I have, people that I'll send things out to. When, the FDA first decided we were not even going to be allowed to be a nonprofit, the IRS, there are people I'd shoot emails to. I'm like, hey, I need you to pray, and so absolutely being around fellow believers, sharing ideas, brainstorming, praying together, always a good thing to be doing. So good point that you made there.
Can I weigh in on one thing that a thread that I think we didn't pick up, but I just saw in the chat? That was the question about work-life balance. And maybe Alynne can weigh in as well. Advice about work-life balance. I think that's, for me, one of the pieces of advice that I've clung to and I share widely is the idea of making everything you do count twice in some sense. And an example of that would be, if you are giving a talk on something, then you might later consider how you might write that up for publication. So that's making that piece of work, that piece of investment count twice. But this can also cross boundaries between the work that you do and your personal life. If you feel, that's one of the ways that we feel often very strained, is that we can't. We have to devote time to family, and we have careers as well. Well, are there ways that you can invite your students into the things you would normally be doing as a family? During the pandemic, actually, it's been a lot easier. So I give an example. So I have a little baby and also was teaching some classes. And I realized one thing I could do to invite my students along with me is I take my baby on walks around the neighborhood. I just invited them to join me in a Zoom call, and I gave them a little tour of the Pasadena neighborhood where I live, right? And that was a way to I don't like the term killing two birds with one stone. So I'll say, to make something I was doing count double.
That's such good advice, Francis. I sometimes frame it as, when you're thinking about a project, reduce, reuse, recycle. But I love your way of putting it, make things count twice. It's a wonderfully positive way. Alynne, I'm sure as the head of a nonprofit where you are wearing many hats, you probably have some thoughts on the work-life balance question as well.
I could not have been called to have been in good balance for a number of years. I was very much a workaholic. I didn't have a husband or children, so I wasn't neglecting any people, but I was neglecting, it's maybe, just my own health and sanity. But I was doing it by choice. This was, my heavens, I wasn't going to stop and try this again a few years later. It was now or never. I had thrown so much into it. I just needed to see if it could get off the ground and make it. And if not, so be it. But I had to give it my all. So I didn't have good balance. I feel like I do now. And yeah, I don't know how to say, I have no words of wisdom as to how to find that balance or what it is for people. Just that you can't neglect yourself or your family at the expense entirely of your job and careers. Too often it continues for decades for people. And that's not healthy. I don't think God calls us to be workaholics. Nowhere in the Bible does it call us to do that. But I can't point the finger and say you shouldn't do something that I did myself for a number of years. So I'm afraid I can't offer advice when I've been guilty of it.
Well, it's great to have a glimpse into your experience. Thank you for sharing some thoughts on that. And I noticed, Mark McEwen, you have your hand raised.
I was really just struck by, I think, what Alynne said about being called to try. And I know in my life, I have a few options available before me. I could go into the trades, I could be a school teacher, and I could try to be a scholar. And I'm really intimidated. I've been warned by people like Peter Enns and John Stackhouse in their public blogs, like, don't even try to get a PhD. Don't even try to go down this road because you're never going to find a job. And I looked at that and my heart just sank. And I just thought, I'm going to be one of those who doesn't get a job. And I should just go be an electrician because I have a ticket and I like wiring houses and there's no politics. I can just pull the wire. What would you say to someone like me? Should I try for it? How do I decide if I should try for it?
Mark, you should try for it.
That was God speaking. Wow. Amazing. Yeah.
I'm serious, Mark. This is Fred Cannon. You're a great troubleshooter. I figured that out a couple days ago. I look all over the world for great troubleshooters like you. When you're doing a PhD, that's what you're doing, is troubleshooting.
Troubleshooting. Well, thank you, Fred. I appreciate that.
Perseverance is the name of the game with getting a PhD. The fact that it's been in your mind of something that you wanted to do, to me, that says that's in your heart, and it probably is very worthy of you trying to do this. It sounds like this is something that's a right fit for you. And where it goes once you get it, don't know. But even the experience of doing it, for instance, there are times that I felt like my degree didn't mean a whole lot, but it was handy to have a PhD when dealing with folks, say, from Latin America, where a female wouldn't get respect. Oh, but a doctor gets respect. So there are times, if you could continue on and get your PhD, and then it might be used in a way you just haven't even envisioned yet in your life in the future. But it certainly sounds like it's a worthy pursuit for you, Mark.
Well, thank you. I don't know if anyone, sorry, were you about to say something, Francis?
I was just going to say, yeah, if you enjoy the work itself, the work of get whatever field you're interested in pursuing, and that's something that you find attractive, even if you didn't get a PhD, then I think it's maybe worth pursuing getting a PhD if you really are interested in the discipline that you want to pursue.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like I find myself jealous of professors who get to teach to students and help them like talk about issues of scripture or or theology or apologetics, science and religion. I think I would definitely be majoring on the teaching and not so much the research. And I don't know if that's a realistic option for me, but I think that would be really the heart of it. But I'm sorry, I'm taking us over time for the Q&A here myself. So
I was going to say this is a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Mark, for that great question. Prompted some wonderful reflection. Alas, in the pursuit of work-life balance, we do have to have a coffee break here. Welcome to the ASA 2021 Early Career InterVarsity reception. We'll have our keynote interview for the reception, Exploring Mars with Roger Wiens, in a moment. We would certainly love for you to join the Emerging Scholars Network. We're part of InterVarsity's campus ministry and graduate and faculty ministry, and we help connect faith and work, especially for those who are considering grad school, in grad school or a postdoc, in an early career faculty role, or in an early career research professional role. So if you are in any of those categories or you advise people who are, we'd welcome you to join for free and get our monthly emails about events like this one and good resources for folks connecting faith and work in those settings. I'm also delighted to highlight our friends in Christian Women in Science. This is a part of the American Scientific Affiliation that supports women who are in science or interested in science. The leadership team includes Lauren Phillips, Vicki Best, Becky English, Janelle Curry, Dorothy Chappelle, and Veronica Franz. I think Veronica's here today, so you may get a chance to say hi to her. And it's a wonderful group. I've been lucky enough to sit in on many of their events, and I would strongly encourage you to join if you are a Christian woman in or interested in science. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mars expert Roger Wiens and the director of Emerging Scholars Network, Bob Trube, who is going to interview him.
Well, thank you, Hannah. And we really appreciate Roger taking the time to be with us today. Our speaker for the third hour is, one of the remarkable things about him is he has actually been knighted by the government of France. He has an asteroid named after him. How many of us can say that? He's worked as a research scientist at Caltech, the University of California, and he's a fellow at Los Alamos National Lab. He was the flight payload lead for the NASA's Genesis mission that collected solar wind samples, revealing new insights about the composition of the sun. He's been involved in robotic explorations to the comets, to the moon, and Mars. He is the leader of the ChemCam laser instrument on the Mars rover Curiosity, and he has directed its exploration since its landing in 2012. Actually, one of the things I've been having fun with is I've been reading Red Rover, which is his inside the story of robotic space exploration from Genesis to the Mars Curiosity rover, and it is indeed an inside account. All the challenges of making the equipment work and developing it for the Martian environment and getting a project approved by NASA. He also, on February 18th, 2021, NASA's latest rover, Perseverance, landed successfully on Mars. He leads the SuperCam laser instrument and is the co-investigator on Sherlock. And I'll let him explain what Sherlock is. So please, all of you, give a warm welcome to Roger Wiens. Maybe you want to wave, whatever. And Roger, it's so great to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Bob. Yeah, I'm glad to be on this interview.
Well, Roger, to start with, as I mentioned, Perseverance landed in February, and I wondered if you might share an update with us about how everything is working so far and what you hope to learn from the mission.
Yeah, so Perseverance is the second of these sort of 1-ton size NASA rovers to land on Mars. Basically in 2012, after NASA saw the success, both publicly and scientifically, of the Curiosity rover at its very beginning, they decided that they would go for another mission with the big rover. And so that became Perseverance. And Perseverance is actually part of a much bigger mission in a sense, because it is the first mission of 3 missions that are supposed to bring samples back from Mars. And so one of the prime goals of Perseverance is to collect samples. And in fact, this very week is the start of that. Right, just to my right here is my work laptop, and I was on duty today actually. We're starting to perform the first week of collecting a sample by using a coring drill, going into this rock that the rover is at right now, and collecting that, and then storing it in the rover until it will get dropped later on the surface of Mars for the future mission. So the mission's going really well. Every instrument is working. Ingenuity, the helicopter, is working. And in fact, I am wearing the flight crew shirt from Ingenuity. I wasn't actually on the flight crew myself, but our instrument SuperCam recorded the flights. And so that's why I feel like I'm at least a little bit able to wear the shirt. And so I'm doing that since it's very festive.
It's very cool. You got right in the mood with us on it. By the way, I'm gonna just give everybody a quick peek at a couple at Curiosity and Rover so they can see what you're talking about here. So there's Curiosity, and then here's Perseverance, I was looking at just all the different kinds of pieces of equipment that are attached to this rover, and you're working with some of those, as I understand.
Yes. Yep. And so it was my job to get the team together, dream up the ideas, and put in the proposal for our instruments on both of those. And I'll show you just a little bit about that, I guess, in terms of the career path that I took.
Yeah, well, hey, let's talk about that a little bit. I think so many of us as kids dreamed of working for NASA or going to space. I saw John Glenn go into space. It was actually piped into our second or third grade classroom, and so many of us were fascinated. Well, you had similar experiences like that, and you've actually gotten to be very involved with space exploration and Mars exploration in particular. Tell us that story.
Well, let me just start with a verse from Psalm 37, verse 1, which says, "Delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And I, as a young person, in fact, a child already, I was following the Lord. I thought that my career path was possibly to study engineering or the sciences, but probably some kind of engineering that would benefit humanity, and potentially go into the third world and act on the behalf of Christianity in terms of being in a spot where I could do missions and also help people in terms of their quality of life. And so you could consider that's a very Christian thing to do, but actually, God really had other plans. And so, it's just like there was this big detour in my life. I went to grad school thinking, well, I would, first of all, I went through college, and I decided at the end of college that maybe, since I didn't see any other way I would go to grad school, that would maybe be my ticket into teaching in a foreign university somewhere. I didn't pay too much attention to what I was doing. For research. As a kid, I had been, actually by the age of 11, I was sketching the features on Mars through our own homemade telescope, thanks to my older brother's help. And we were launching model rockets and all kinds of things in a small town out in the Midwest. And so we just thought these were hobbies, but that grew into my life's work. So my thesis work, I actually took something, and let me share my screen here, a topic which was going to be very, very interesting to me, and it was studying Martian meteorites. And so I ended up doing the first PhD thesis on the Martian atmosphere. as collected and returned to us by meteorites from Mars. And so that was something that I just thought was an interesting thing, and that I would go on and use my physics degree to teach overseas or something like that. Well, I didn't find that position right away. I went to take a postdoc at UC San Diego. I actually lost that job. I had a week worth of warning, and it just turned out that I had a job interview that had been requested that I go interview at Caltech that week. And it was, as I say in the book, it was the shortest interview ever. I knew I needed a job. Nothing overseas had materialized. And so I walked into this office knowing that my current job was ending very quickly, and I'd looked all over for a job. So this was a job that was to study the feasibility of doing a mission to return solar wind to the Earth. And I walked into the office for this interview, and the person giving the interview said, well, he knew me reasonably well and thought I had a good track record. So he said, basically, you can have the job as soon as I had sat down. And I said, basically, I'll take it. And that was the shortest interview ever. And that got me into what was my next real job, which was this space mission that was called Genesis, that flew from 2001 to 2004, really trying to understand the origins of our solar system with some of the composition of the sun, both isotopic as well as elemental, to be gleaned from the returned material that we got from solar wind. That mission, I was very involved in the development of the instruments and the solar collectors, and then it flew from 2001 to 2004. I was a payload lead on that, and the landing didn't go as planned. So I was in a hangar in Utah in 2004. This is a picture of that place. The helicopters had been contracted to capture this capsule in midair as it was parachuting down, but the parachutes never deployed. And so this is what it ended up looking like on the floor of the desert. And so I was in the front row of this VIP and media area. And so suddenly I was surrounded by 20 microphones and all the major networks cut to show this. So that was my first real big experience with the media. And this was what was happening out there in the meantime. So as it turns out, we did not lose that mission because we had the samples that were broken up. But there was one experiment in particular that I had been leading, and that was concentrating solar wind. And that concentrator, while it was demolished, the target was not. So here is the target on the front cover of Science magazine several years later when we published the results of the oxygen and nitrogen isotopic composition of the sun. Throughout my career, I have seen God working terrible catastrophes out for good. And so I've been extremely blessed. So at that same year as that crash, I had been working with another colleague here at Los Alamos to develop a new technique for studying chemistry on other planetary surfaces using a laser, called laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. And so we put in this proposal for the Mars, what's now the Curiosity rover. It was called the Mars Science Laboratory. This was the cover of that proposal, showing that we could do both chemistry and close-up imaging with this laser-based instrument. And NASA selected it. It was in partnership with a postdoc who went back to France, his native country, and got the French Space Agency involved. And so it's been a partnership ever since. So here I am in about 2008, working with laser goggles on with the ChemCam instrument, getting it ready. And it was canceled by NASA at one point, and that's described in the book, and all the things that happened to get it back on board. But it eventually flew and in 2011. And here is a picture of ChemCam on the Curiosity rover, one of the selfies. So the book that I wrote describes all of the events up till here in my career, it really was a result of this turnaround where I was still thinking maybe God would send me overseas somewhere, and instead God caused me to lose my job and pick and take the only job that was offered and go into planetary science in a big way for the rest of my career. So in that same year that the Curiosity landed, NASA announced the Perseverance rover. I was having a lot of fun on Mars, but I knew that if we wanted to keep up with the times, we had to work on a new proposal, and this new proposal would have to develop new technologies. And so now we proposed an instrument that was not just chemistry, but also two different forms of mineralogy sensing from the same instrument. And in fact, our French colleagues even added a microphone. So we're now doing a lot of different techniques from one instrument. I call it a schizophrenic instrument. NASA has better words for it, but we have all of these different teams that are doing different techniques, and it's quite amazing. So here I was in about 2015 when there was just a picture of the 2020 rover, and I'm just showing where our instrument is to be located on the rover. So here is the selfie that was taken in, I believe it was April, with the Ingenuity helicopter. As I said, I'm wearing the helicopter flight crew shirt today, and we've been having a lot of great experiences with this team. My instrument team is about 100 people strong, including the engineers and the scientists in a number of different countries. And then the whole science team is about 400 people for the rover. And it's a big crew doing a lot of work on Mars together. And it's fun just even to be a small part of this team, let alone leading the SuperCam instrument. So what a blessing. So I'll leave you with this clip from the movie The Martian, where you'll meet Matt Damon with ChemCam, or an outtake.
Hey, Johansson. I know you don't like it when I touch the ChemCam, but I'm touching the ChemCam. A lot.
There you go. So anyway, that's a little bit of my career.
By the way, we wanted to mention we all got whirligigs in honor or in recognition of the helicopter that has flown on Mars, and we're going to put these to use later. So previews of coming attractions. Hey, I wanted to ask you, what has surprised you most in your research so far, in your Mars research so far?
Yeah. If we go back a few years, when Curiosity had not yet landed, there was a lot of discussion about whether Mars actually had a habitable environment. And so I would have to say that is the biggest surprise. And the reason that debate was so strong is that the climate dynamics of Mars, being farther from Earth, a small planet, such a thin atmosphere now, suggested that Mars never had the warm enough temperatures to support water, open water on Mars. And yet when Curiosity landed, we found just a ton of evidence that Gale Crater, where the rover was, had once been a huge lake. And not only for a short amount of time, but over at least 1 million years and probably millions of years, that rover has climbed 450 meters up in lake bed sediments with layers that are each about 1 millimeter thick. So, you multiply that millimeter times this 450 meters that we've driven, and you know that we've gone through a lot of yearly cycles at least in this lake. So the habitability, that was fresh water. And so just as Earth was a habitable and still is a habitable environment, Mars was a habitable planet earlier in its history. And that raises the question of, was there life on Mars? And it just goes back to whether God would have created life on 2 planets or maybe many planets in the universe or within the galaxy, and many other questions along with that, or whether life has traveled between the planets. Just a huge number of questions. At one point, I think I was a little bit afraid of those kinds of questions. But thinking about how understanding God's universe brings us closer to understanding God really informs me and encourages me and motivates me to want to pursue those questions as a way of understanding both God's universe and God Himself better that way.
Well, that brings me to our last question. I am so thrilled about your convictions about Mars research and and just the wonder of what you have found and some of the important discoveries you've made. How, as a Christian, would you make a case to fellow believers for the importance of the research that you're doing, and particularly the expenditures that are involved in that, the public funding and other funding that goes into doing this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. Let me just go back and say, first of all, it's a great privilege to be doing this. I think it inspires many or all of us to be exploring. And as I started to relate a little bit earlier, we have different ways of understanding God or Creator. If we look at Psalm 19, it talks in the first half about how the heavens are telling about Him, and in the second half about the book itself, the Bible, and the written revelation. But we have both of those, and so studying those is a form of worship. Studying God's creation, exploration is a form of worship, and so I enjoy worshiping God in that way. Now, do we really justify huge expenditures that way? That's a political question. I don't really want to answer that, but I will just suggest this: that we need to look in many different directions with public funds to help our fellow human beings, hugely. Also, to not tax people too much. I grew up working on a farm. And I know that we as individuals need to have the liberty to be able to work without excessive tax burden. And then, of course, we have the privilege of exploring through being a large nation and having some of that money for that. So I think all of those are good things. And so I won't go any further than that.
Well, I realize there is some tenuous ground there. Well, we have some time now for some audience Q&A, and we'd invite people through the raised hand function to ask questions. And when you do so, you'll need to unmute yourself. And so as you're thinking about your questions, we did have a comment from Veronica who said, I was also wondering about the fear of finding answers to questions as a scientist and a Christian. I love that you move with confidence and are just motivated by God instead. I think that's encouraging for many young scientists who wonder, am I going to find something that's going to really throw up questions for my faith?
Yeah, I think there's several things that we can say there. One is that all truth is God's truth, and we really ought to be searching for the truth, no matter what it is. And I'm not threatened by that. God is not threatened by that. And in fact, that is one of the prime areas where I really appreciate ASA and other organizations like it, because I go into many churches and I don't find people addressing those questions, at least not nearly to my satisfaction. And yet we have these organizations that will lay it on the line, and we can ask any questions and really chew on this work of how do we balance and integrate the science that we are finding with the scriptures that we have that were written long ago but inspired. And so I really appreciate the ability to do that within this organization. Yeah.
Hey, Mark from our ASA team asked the question, what did the Martian get wrong?
And you're talking about the movie, of course.
Yeah, the movie. Well, the book and the movie, yeah.
Yeah, in the book. So The main thing really that they got wrong was the storm at the beginning. There are storms on Mars and there are windy places. We have seen where the Curiosity rover was in among some dunes, and we would do something with the arm, whether it's drilling a hole or whatever, and the next day the dust would have been already blown away. But the wind is not strong enough to blow any human structure over. It somehow does move the dust, but that's it. And so that windstorm was not a correct depiction of how things happen on Mars. But there are a lot of things that were maybe minimized in the movie, like the radiation damage on people's bodies is significant. And that's something to very much take into account when we do try to send humans there. And then, of course, the difficulty of sending humans there in general was maybe slightly minimized as well. So, but otherwise, it was an exciting movie, and I really liked it because it showed a lot of realistic aspects of what it will be like someday for human exploration.
Yeah. Well, maybe a follow-up question on that one from Fred. Can we grow potatoes on Mars?
I think so, yeah. And in fact, a colleague of mine, Chris McKay, submitted a proposal to NASA for a whole mission to be based on growing a beanstalk on Mars. This was a number of years ago, before the movie The Martian. So I think those things are entirely feasible. So let's see what happens in the future.
Hey, and Mike has said Mars fries, yes. French fries from Mars, or Mars fries. Okay. Hey, a little more serious question. This came from Stephen. Do you have a chance to share your faith with colleagues and the public? What limits or challenges do you see there?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. People don't necessarily expect me to be a person of faith or to talk about faith, but the two are so intertwined in my career, so I don't hesitate to talk about the fact that I think my career has been God-directed, and all of my colleagues, or at least certainly all of my close colleagues, know that I am a person of faith and am active in my church and so on, they do not. To my knowledge, put me down for it, so that's great. I appreciate that, and I think I certainly do talk about prayer. I talk about prayer for our instrument at times because we have had failures, and we've had some very amazing recoveries. Some of them mentioned in the book. I'll just hold this as well, that you already showed, Bob, but Red Rover. And in fact, at one place, my kids were making almost a joke about it because they said, "Do you want to pray about that failure too?" And so there is that, and especially the fact that I believe that God is sovereign over our lives and over our hardware, even on another planet.
Let's see. Paul Arvison. Paul, you wanted to ask a question orally. Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Roger, I first heard your name in conjunction with the ASA database of articles, and I believe that your articles on radiometric dating were among the top most frequently read articles of all. And that goes back some years, but it was a very helpful contribution to that discussion. And I wonder if at this point you have received any feedback from young Earth folks or others about the impact of those articles.
Yeah, so that effort came about when I moved to San Diego for my postdoc, and really started encountering a number of people who didn't seem to understand the geology behind radiometric dating, and were trying to argue otherwise about it. And so I put together a booklet. Basically, it was, I think, 35, 40 pages, so not really a book. And the ASA was hopefully going to publish it. But this was right at the dawn of the internet. I mean, this was a long time ago now. And they said, well, we don't really have the money to publish it, but there's this new thing called the internet, and we'll put it on our website. And so it went on there as one of the very first things on the ASA website. And about that, a couple of years later, Yahoo came along, and they started doing search engine searches. And this radiometric dating site, which is called Radiometric Dating, a Christian Perspective, came up as a #1 site for anybody looking for radiometric dating, whether they're a Christian or anyone else. And so this started getting 10,000 hits a year and more. And it has gotten that for, I believe, 15 years. So I used to get a lot of email. Some of it was very grateful email. Some of it was hate email. But anyway, I did a lot to answer many of the email queries on that. And I think maybe the time has passed a little bit where there's more recent sites now. I updated it once in the 2000s, but this was something that I think was very useful for a long time. I would go to scientific meetings and run into colleagues who said, hey, I've used this when I had a number of Christians in my geology classes who wanted to understand this. And so I think it's been useful over a number of years. It is unfortunately still a topic of debate among some churches and so on. So I think we still need to get the word out on how radiometric dating works. But yeah, it's been a very good thing, and thanks to ASA for making it that.
Well, thank you very much.
Fred left a question here. He said, has ChemCam found any amino acid type chemicals? And maybe you could comment on the significance of such a finding too.
Yeah, so the Curiosity rover is equipped with an instrument that was really designed for organic molecules. And so ChemCam cannot, it finds the elements, but not the molecular form or the compounds of those elements. And so the instrument SAM, the sample analysis on Mars, does that. And so in 2018, Curiosity arrived at a place called the Clay-Rich Unit on the lower slopes of Mount Sharp. We had been discovering or finding clay in the sediments before that. But here was a richer area of clay minerals, and they are known to preserve organic materials. And sure enough, we found a richer abundance of clay minerals there, including long-chain organic molecules like dodecane, ring molecules, certainly a number of benzene and more complex ring organic molecules, showing that there is a rich abundance of organics when we get away from radiation damage or get to a place where ancient organics can be preserved. Now, whether those were once amino acids or not, we don't know. They're right on the surface within a few centimeters. That's as far as the drill goes. And we know that they've been pummeled by radiation for eons. So they have, in fact, complexed with sulfur, which tends to help them survive as organics. But they've changed their form since the rocks were laid down in the lake. And so one of the big questions is, what was the original form? And so we don't know whether there might have been amino acids or not. We're really trying to study that and understand it. And that'll continue with the return of samples with the Perseverance and follow-on missions as well. A big question.
Yeah, it sounds like getting those samples back to Earth will be a really important part of the whole research project.
Yes.
Yeah. Veronica asked a great question about what kinds of ethics issues do you face? She says, I feel like research here on Earth can get complicated. What's it like for your research?
I think maybe since I'm not in a biotech kind of area or some other areas where ethics may be a bigger question with stem cell research, whatever it is, maybe have fewer of those types of questions to deal with. But obviously, anytime we work in a community, there is a huge amount of ethics. with how we treat our fellow humans, and then also many things such as honesty and trying to maybe take shortcuts in our work, these things like plagiarism. And so I think as a leader in the project or even in the field, I think it's really important that I and others like me model and also teach that honesty, integrity are such important values for us. In science, the success of science as a whole rides on that. And so that is of utmost importance. And I think, we are going to be more respected as scientists and humans if we actually follow Christ's principles in our everyday work. And that needs to be understood by everyone in our scientific community. So I'll just answer it that way.
One of the things that your discussion prompted me in reading the Red Rover book is it seems like there's a real tension that a lot of scientists walk between competition and collaboration. I wonder if you might say a little more about that.
Yeah. So I lead a big team, and I think one of the things is actually I have a mentor I'll mention, and he's actually he was a brigadier general in the Swiss Army, and his main language is German, so I speak to him mostly in German, but he's written several books that are at least available in Switzerland on leadership within the ranks, and those books are actually universally applicable for leaders because it talks about going the extra mile. These are all Christian principles, by the way, of course, about turning the other cheek. Okay, we should not be offended by anyone, and leading from within. Okay, within the team. So we don't have to always be out in front. We can be pushing others and encouraging them from inside of our team. And those kind of leadership principles are important, especially for us as believers. And I think they'll be well respected by anybody in a team. I'll just say that.
Moving back to a question that has to do with film and maybe a combination, maybe some fun and seriousness. Mark asks, wondering whether you've seen The Expanse and whether that strikes you as realistic. It deals with militaristic colonies on a partly terraformed Mars. And I know that terraforming of Mars is one of the questions that is under consideration.
Well, I'm afraid I'll have to just say I have not seen this, and so unfortunately, I'm perhaps too busy with Mars and to do a lot of science fiction myself, and so I try to deal in reality instead, and spend time with my family when I'm not doing that. So trying to balance both of those. So sorry, I'm afraid I can't answer that one.
Yeah. Can you say anything about the? Can you say anything about this whole idea of terraforming? And is that a possibility?
Well, it's a fascinating idea. This idea that we could, over time, change the environment on Mars enough that it could be much more habitable. And I've been a strong proponent of that. We are changing the environment on Earth, and we've known since the previous century that we can do that, and then we can. In fact, we were changing the CFCs originally with our refrigerants, and we were able to slow that way down. And now we have the greenhouse gases that are causing a challenge to us, and we need to do something about that. But can we terraform another planet? Mars is only 1/10 the mass of Earth, so it's much smaller, actually. So it'd be, in one sense, easier to do. However, a recent paper points out that the carbon resources near the surface of Mars, if you were able to take all of the carbon that we think is near the surface of Mars and convert it into carbon dioxide or even methane, we would not have enough to warm up the planet enough to make it nice and balmy and have lakes there now. So it seems as if Mars' habitable time has come and gone, and that habitable time was several billion years ago, so it wasn't even anywhere remotely recent. I love the idea, but it just doesn't seem feasible, at least in the way we think about it. Now, living underground, well, that's another thing. I've actually advocated for exploring Mars caves, but that's not necessarily to send, to make large cities underground, at least not in the foreseeable future. It's a great thought, though. I love the ideas and the creativity.
Well, hey, I think our time is up, but we've had it's been really fun, and it's been fun for me personally just to meet you. I've heard a lot about your work, and so pleased to meet you. And I've followed some of the news coverage of this, and so it's a real joy to actually meet somebody involved with that and to hear more of what you all hope to accomplish. And so, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
My pleasure, and thank you for being involved in the ASA.
Well, it's a great organization. We're so grateful for our partnership with them, and really helping Christians Christians in the sciences think about what they're how to really follow Christ in that area. So, thank you so much, Roger. We're going to move into our next stage of things. Okay, we want to take a few minutes just to celebrate this conference and this day. And so we were wondering, we would love for you just to take a few minutes to write in the chat, what are some things that have encouraged you at this conference, and particularly in the early career track, something that you'd like to celebrate? Okay, Stephen has said, so exciting to see young people excited about science and faith. Mike, the lack of fear in pursuing truth about God's creation. That's a great idea, isn't it? Refreshing insight. Let's see. What was the one? Refreshing insight on work-life balance. New connections with other Christians. Yes, that's one of the wonderful things about ASA. Mark is just grateful that everything has gone well. Mark has been the guy who's been working on our technology. Community. Celebrating the gift of nature and the gift of knowing where it came from. Veronica says, celebrating the trials and failures. God pulls through for us because we're called by him. Tom, reconnecting, new connections. I think that one of the great things I think a lot of us are looking forward to is when we can even do that more robustly in person. And we're hoping next year to do that in San Diego. Testimonies of God's faithfulness, to place a passion idea on someone's heart and then to make a way for them to pursue it to his glory. I think a lot of us wonder, is that possible? Is what we're doing now possible? To be in a community fighting the lie that science and religion must be mutually exclusive. Boy, amen, amen. Lots of thanks for Mark and helping us on tech. Synthetic mRNA and Zoom technologies. Boy, God has really blessed us with both of those in the last year and a half, hasn't he? Well, there have been a lot of things to celebrate, and we hope one of the things that you will continue to do is to be able to think about how God has met you during this conference, how God has encouraged your heart during this conference. You might not only write it down in the chat, but write it down someplace where you can keep it and come back to it in the months and weeks ahead, because I think that can be one of the ways that a conference like this goes on and continues to live in our lives. Well, we want to just bring things to a close here. Encourage you, if you didn't win today's copy of the book, please do pick it up at Hendrickson Publishers, or you can order it through Amazon. Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks to all of you for joining us and for taking this Sunday afternoon, and many of you have taken an abundance of other time out to be with us at the ASA conference and in the early career track. We want to thank our partners with the American Scientific Affiliation, particularly Vicki Best and Becky English and Mark McEwen, who have worked on our tech. Mark has worked on our tech today, and Vicki has just been a great partner. And the executive director for ASA, John, has just been a wonderful partner to interact with. We just so appreciate their heart for seeing Christians in Science really encouraged in their work. We think that staying in community is a particularly important way to take this conference home. To stay in touch with the ASA members we've met, and we've had great opportunities to make connections there. One of the things we'd encourage you is, if you're not an ASA member, to join, and that students particularly can join free and get an electronic copy of Perspectives, which I love getting every quarter, and just reading up on some of the thinking about Christians in Science. And as I said, students can join for free. Membership information is available at, actually, there's a shorter URL than this. It's just going to asa3.org to that website, and you can find the membership information easily there. Of course, Hannah and I, and we've already done this, we want to invite you to join the Emerging Scholars Network, and you are welcome to join for free. Just go to blog.emergingscholars.org and go to, and it says Join ESN Today, and click on that button, and you are all set. So with that, we want to conclude our time. May I just conclude with a prayer of blessing for you all, and then we'll sign off. Our Father, we do give thanks for the gift of scientia, the capacity that you've given us to understand the creation. We thank you for the gift that you've given us of community with others who are engaged in that enterprise together. And Father, we thank you for, finally, for the opportunities in our work to seek and serve the common good. Lord, we don't even always know how that's going to turn out, but we trust that as we pursue you, you will bring good fruit out of the work that we do. And so we thank you for your calling, your invitation to us. Father, we pray for these sisters and brothers as we come toward the end of our conference, that you will continue to have your gracious hand upon them wherever they go, in their pastoral work and teaching, and in their scientific research. Would you give great grace to them? We pray these things in the strong name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.